My name is Reed Admire. I'm the Executive Director at the Urban Food Loop Project. We're a community compost company operating in Little Rock and North Little Rock, Arkansas. I had just moved back to Little Rock from an apprenticeship on a farm in Newton County, Arkansas. And I was in graduate school at the Clinton School of Public Service in 2015. I entered into a social enterprise pitch competition. The dean of the school challenged us to choose a social issue, some problem, and I was particularly interested in the food systems. And composting was something that I learned on the farm that I had been living on, and I was currently doing it at my own home. I was working late nights during grad school at a high-end restaurant, and we had all this farm fresh produce coming in and we'd prepare it, but there's so much going out. And I asked if I could just start bringing my tub and collecting it, and then the restaurant next door asked if they could start adding theirs, and then it just kind of trickled. So the Urban Food Loop's mission is simply to make communities more sustainable by teaching people how to make and use compost locally. As a nonprofit, we have a formal mission statement, and that mission statement is the mission of the Urban Food Loop is to transform local food systems by engaging stakeholders along the food supply chain and introducing small shifts in key areas of everyday practices and behaviors. We strive to make communities healthier, more sustainable, and more equitable by teaching people about closed food loop systems, providing community services that reduce carbon emissions in food supply chains, combat food insecurity, and restore our nation's degraded farmland soils, all by teaching farmers and consumers how to make and use compost locally. We really want to see a world where no food scraps are landfilled, but instead composted and entirely recycled through local food systems. We started at the Heifer Urban Farm in 2015, and for a couple of years we were there composting on site, helping to turn what was a 2-acre brownfield into a certified, naturally grown, organic urban farm. We realized that in order to scale, we needed more equipment, but we really weren't sure what we needed. And so I negotiated a partnership with the Little Rock Zoo. They have a 500 cubic yard composting facility, which is a commercial compost facility. Their composting operation had basically turned into a storage space for Boo at the Zoo and other kind of older zoo exhibits. So Tom Frothingham was the gardener and horticulturalist at the Little Rock Zoo, and he and I were on the Urban Agriculture Committee together. And he knew kind of what I was trying to do with composting and try to really push food waste composting in a commercial way, in a municipal way. And he just said, you know, we have this whole space and we barely use all of it. Maybe, you know, we could see if we could do something. And so we just got to talking, and I helped them to kind of clean out the space and to ramp up their elephant manure production. And at the same time, they gave me about 10% of their space, about 50 cubic yards I was able to make. And that way we were able to pilot taking on a lot more restaurants, and we had all the equipment we thought we needed to do it. So that lasted, it was supposed to last a year. It lasted about 6 months because we maxed out capacity much quicker than we thought. There's a lot more food scraps than we realized. In 2018, we moved to the Rose City Urban Farm, and for about 2 years I was looking for commercial property to purchase. And we've negotiated a long-term lease in the 630 corridor. And so we're developing a 2-acre property on 15th and Woodrow Street that'll be a community compost facility. So we'll have a 500 cubic yard system, but we'll also have a community garden, and we'll also have a community teaching space. We are moving in this month. We have just started, just gotten the property mowed. We've just gotten the lease signed. We'll see how quick it grows. I'm not real sure. The way we compost in an aerated static pile, and we do that in batches. The aerated static pile means that we need to have all of our inputs all at once. So we don't come in every day and put a little bit and then the next day a little more, and then it's not like that. We hold back 32-gallon toters And so we have about 100 of these, and we wait till they're full. That's about 2 weeks' time. So it takes us about 2 weeks to fill up the current capacity of where we're at. So we have all of our nitrogen material sitting in a food-safe container, right? And then we have a store of leaves. We use leaves because we're in Arkansas and there's lots of oak trees, and people think the leaves are trash, and they're not. And then the other thing that we keep on stock is an equal amount, a surplus of wood chips. And those wood chips have to be about 1 to 3 inches in bulk density. And so, whereas, a lot of people may be used to going out and turning a compost pile ever so often with a pitchfork or with a front-end loader, or maybe you've even seen somebody turning with a windrow turner. If we're in an urban area and we have 500 cubic yards of compost that we're cutting open with a bucket every day, and there's anybody anywhere close, they're gonna smell it. But with an aerated static pile, you do that one time and you're done, and you never have to turn it, so there's no emissions, and you don't have to smell it. You do have to sift out the wood chips. That's the one kind of extra step. We rely on a pre-mixture. We only mix once, and then we leave it. We take a front-end loader and we pile on our food scraps, and then our leaves, and then wood chips and food scraps and leaves, and we do this until we have a 1-to-1-to-1 mixture based on the volume of food scraps we have. And then we use a front-end loader to turn that and turn that and turn that, and we get a homogeneous mixture. So now that your nitrogen and your carbon are all evenly mixed, and they're bulked, so to speak, with this wood chip material, and then that mix is ready to go on the aerated static system. And all the aeration system is, it's a few segments of HDPE piping laid out together, and there's some perforated holes drilled into the 2 long links of the fuel goalpost, and there's a fan blowing through the shorter side. And so we put what we call a plenum, we take 6 inches of wood chips and cover the whole base. So that's our big carbon layer if anything were to leach down. That also creates preferential air channels. So when you're forcing air through this system, we have it on an interval timer. So it goes off for 30 seconds every few minutes, and this goes on for about 8 weeks, on and off, all day, just on and off, pumping air through this system, and then the air comes out, it trickles up through the wood chips, and like I said, it's a 1-to-1-to-1 mixture, right? So there's food scraps, leaves, and wood chips all mixed together, and now the air's coming up, and all the wood chips are creating channels for that air to rise up. And so instead of going through and turning with a tractor or a windrow turner, we're able to aerate our pile and only ever turn it one time. And because it's constantly pumping air through there, it only takes 8 weeks for it to finish the composting system. And then we like to wait another 8 to 12 weeks in what we call curing, so that it really lets all the microorganisms grow to their fullest capacity in finished and cured compost. So to build a basic pile and ensure pathogen reduction, you really need to make sure your moisture content's right and your temperature's there. So you have to have a good even blend of your carbon and your nitrogen materials. You have to make sure that palm squeeze test is happening, and then you have to make sure that it's getting up to 131 degrees. And in an ASP system, it's for 3 days of continuous 131 degree temperature. Or if you're doing windrow, one of the drawbacks there is that it has to be 15 days of 131 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a lot easier to hit it in an ASP because everything's blended very evenly, and you have continuous airflow that you can dial up or down depending on what your readings are. And we also use, at the end, we use what we call a biofilter or a carbon cap, but it's usually just like a 2 to 3 inch layer of either finished compost or leaves or wood chips. And that ensures that everything is actually getting up to temperature on the inside and not being exposed to the air temperatures. It also helps to reduce any kind of smell or nuisance. It also, if you use finished compost, it can help to inoculate some of the microorganisms into the new composting material. The way that we collect the food scraps isn't just one way. Residences, business, restaurants, hospitals, schools, we have a residential subscription where people can pay and will come and pick up their food scraps. We have community drop-offs where people can pay and just swap their buckets and get a clean one. We also have community drop-offs where people can just bring their own bucket, dump it at a community garden, and then they're responsible for taking their bucket and then cleaning it themselves. So once we bring back the totes to our headquarter location, that's when we really look for our batch. Whatever we have in a 2-week period in terms of food scraps, we say, okay, we need that amount in leaves and in wood chips. And then we make our 3-to-1 mixture on site. We get that homogeneous mix, and then we load that with the front end loader onto our ASP system. We cap it with that biofilter, and then we also use some agri-fabric. It's almost just like really thick landscaping fabric, and it allows the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. But we just use a front end loader. Get the pile nice and homogeneous, turn the pre-mix. We use the front end loader to pile that onto the HDPE piping system, or the ASP as we call it. And then we wait for about 24 hours. We take the temperature. Depending on the temperature, we make some decisions from there. We set the ASP on a timer, and generally it's on for about 30 seconds and off for about 1.5 minutes. And that goes for 8 weeks. We check our temperatures daily, and often twice a day. We're out on site. Somebody's out there, and we have a log, and it's just in a Google sheet, so it's really easy to share with our team. And so it's not just me monitoring it. It makes it a lot easier. And it's just a simple spreadsheet, and we say, is it morning or afternoon, and what time is it, and what's the temperature? And we definitely check it at least those first 3 days. And if it's not hitting the temperature we need for that thermophilic decomposition and the pathogen reduction, then we might have to turn the pile again. We might have to add some more nitrogen. Or if there's no pathogenic danger if it gets too hot. If it gets up to 170 degrees, that's not a problem in terms of pathogens, but it's killing off some of the beneficial microorganisms that we're trying to keep. So if it gets too hot for us, sometimes we'll open up the pile and then put it back together once the temperature drops a little bit. We get into our resting and curing phase, and so that is about 8 weeks. I was taught that we waited till it got down to air temperature, which I've heard is 71 degrees. And so we make sure that our pile is not only done cooking, but it's also completely cool, and so that we can see microbial activity, ants, just worms, things starting to happen and come alive in the pile. So 8 weeks for it to actually compost, and then at least another 8 to 12 weeks to let it cure and sit. We don't turn it, we don't touch it, we just let it sit and cool all the way down. We use a Trommel Screen for our residential customers. It's a Sittler Trommel Screen. It has a 1 cubic yard hopper, and so we can use our front end loader. We take a scoop of the finished compost and we go over to the Trommel Screen and we dump the bucket into the hopper, and inside the hopper there is a conveyor belt. The conveyor belt feeds the finished compost down into the Trommel Screen, and the Trommel Screen is just turning and rolling. So screen overs are exactly that, the things that are oversized to fall through your screen. And so the trommel is like tilted on an angle and it's sifting, and all of the really fine, super decomposed material falls out. And that's that black gold that we all know and talk about. But the overs, it might be little pieces of twigs or sticks or leaves that somehow didn't decompose, or a pumpkin stem, or it's just bigger chunks of organic material. Honestly, I think it's some of the best material, and that's what I end up taking and using in my garden because it's what's left over. A lot of people will use their screened overs to put back into the pile, because when we're talking about that 1-to-1-to-1 mixture, if every time you're screening out the same wood chips, they'll break down a little bit each time you put them through. They start to smooth out and kind of look more like pebbles almost, but they're still very much thick, dense pieces of carbon wood material, and then they have more biology in them each time. So our finished product goes back mostly to right now to our subscribers. So our residential customers get back a certain amount of compost per year, and we're just getting to the point in our scale where we're starting to sell it publicly. And so we'll have wholesale where you could come with a truck and we'll take a scoop and we'll fill you up. And then we're also starting to bag it and sell it into retail markets. The aerated static pile method we chose because there's no odor nuisance. Nobody's going to smell what we're doing. We use a biofilter and we use that agrofabric I mentioned so that it doesn't smell, but it's also, it looks tidy. It looks tidy if you see 3 or 4 piles that have a nice piece of green fabric over them. We have neighbors, and so we're really cognizant of that, and not only for sight and smell, but also in an urban environment, you're going to have nuisance from vermin, from animals. So we have raccoons, we have dogs, and that poses a risk for further infection. You don't want your compost pile to be done cooking and have all this great microbial activity happening, and then a raccoon comes and spreads pathogens on it. So we're trying to keep animals out, and that happens by making sure we get our piles up to temp, that they're covered, that our premises are secured. People are pretty excited about recycling. Nobody's really excited about trash, but everybody that composts is really excited about it. And so that's one of the things that I think has been really surprising about composting in an urban environment is we thought we'd get a little bit more pushback because it's not always the easiest or cleanest thing, but the people that are doing it really like doing it. In terms of advice, if anyone else is interested in starting something like this in their community, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to assist. Also, feel free to reach out to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, or also known as ILSR. They're a national-based organization out of Washington, D.C., and they host the Community Compost Coalition, of which the Urban Food Loop is a member. There's about 100 other community compost companies all across the country, and we network together regularly talking about everything we talked about today, from policy issues to how much air you're pushing through your ASP system to what buckets you use. So this is a growing industry, and the Community Compost Coalition, they are also going to adhere to that double or triple bottom line, where they're really looking for social change and keeping the process local. None of these companies are trying to expand and have a mega monopoly. They're all trying to take food scraps where they're created and keep them there, turn them into compost, and make sure that that compost gets out to local growers in their area. So if anyone's interested in starting a similar business in your community, I really encourage you to reach out to myself or to reach out to Brenda Platt at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance.